All right, ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Darrel Ray. Dr. Darrel Ray. He's got a background in organizational psychology. He's very involved with the Secular Student Alliance and developing leaders. And he's the founder and chair of Recovering from Religion. This may make you blush. Did Jesus masturbate? The sexual mythology of our religious culture. Please welcome Darrel Ray.
Thank you. Are we working here? All right. Well, I have all this legal stuff today. Now let's talk about sex. A lot more interesting. Although I did really enjoy the legal stuff. Thought about being a lawyer. They gave me a test when I was in graduate school, and they said, well, you could either be a lawyer or a psychologist. And I said, well, I'm way too honest to be a lawyer, so I guess I'll have to be a psychologist. So I'm here to talk about one chapter in my latest book, Sex and God: How Religion Distorts Sexuality. And we will be talking about, did Jesus masturbate or not? There will be a test at the end, and there's 4 different answers to the question. You need to pay attention here. But before I do that, I want to do a little paid political announcement, or probably unpaid, actually, and that is, if you are interested in recovering from religion, or if you are recovering from religion, you want to help us in any way, I'd encourage you to go to our website and look at what we're doing. We have hundreds of groups literally throughout the world. We are now in 4 different countries. And our executive director, Sarah Moorhead, is doing great work. She lives in Omaha, Nebraska. And we've got thousands of people coming to our meetings every month. We have monthly meetings. And we've got a lot of other aspects going on within recovering from religion. But the main thing is there are thousands of groups that will get you into religion. We are the only one that will help you get out. That's our motto. And as Aaron Ross said recently, I'm quoting him, I'm stealing him shamelessly. No longer, religion is no longer a chronic condition. You can fully recover. And that's our belief as well. Also, a subset of recovering from religion is the Secular Therapy Project. I figured out some years ago that you cannot advertise as a secular psychologist in Oklahoma City. You can't, in Little Rock, if you raised your hand and said, I'm a secular therapist, churches would stop referring to you, obviously. Hospitals would stop referring to you. Judges would stop referring to you. Your entire practice would be blown away. So it's very important for secularists to be able to connect with secularists, but they can't do it up front. So what we did is we created a site, kind of like Match.com. You can date, go through. You can't date, you can find a therapist. But you anonymously can go through our system, go to seculartherapy.org, and you can find a therapist that we guarantee will not send you back to church or try to get your chakras realigned. They will use evidence-based methodology for you and your loved ones. So if you know someone who needs a good psychologist or a good social worker, a good therapist, go to our website first. I'm not guaranteeing you'll find somebody, but we're growing every day. This is the latest statistics. I just pulled them off this morning. We've got 148 secular therapists and 4 waiting to get certified. It takes quite a bit for us to approve you if you're coming through our system. And we have 2,311 clients, 2,311 people looking for therapists within our website. So, all right, so let's consecrate this meeting, which is something that's important to do. How many Pastafarians do I have in here? All right, bless you, my children. You may not know it, but I am the high priest of the Church of Flying Spaghetti Monster. Some of you may have seen this before, so just pray along with me. Dear Flying Spaghetti Monster, we thank you for giving us sex and sexuality, whether homo or heterosexual, bi or trans, and for not making us like those uptight Christians, Muslims, Mormons, and Baptists. We thank you for wonderful masturbatory fantasies and for the pornography on which they're often based. FSM, we ask that you grant us sex partners, lovers, wives, and husbands that know where our G-spot, our clitoris, and the sweet spot on our penis is. Grant us long, loving foreplay with deep, wet kisses and huge orgasms and loving cuddles after. Grant us the courage and wisdom to communicate openly and honestly with our partners and give them more pleasure than we receive, for we know it is far better to give than to receive. Your noodliness. We do not need 72 virgins. In fact, we ask that you send us no virgins, for we don't want to have to train them. Unless they're very willing to be trained, of course. We especially plead today that you not send us any repressed Christian virgins, male or female, for they will only feel guilty and cause great problems with their abstinence-only training. Your posthumous, we ask that you give us the wisdom to understand and appreciate our partner's kinks, or lack thereof, whether foot worship or spanking, ropes or talking dirty. Help us to fully appreciate their full sexuality, and lead us not into temptation and judgment and scorn for others when their sexual preferences are not ours. We ask in the name of Raman for retribution, shame, and scorn on pedophile priests, hypocritical ministers sleeping with the choir director, and gay-bashing closeted ministers, etc. Oh, Spaghetti-O. We ask that you send us condoms and birth control in abundance, and your many blessings to the many dedicated workers at the Trojan Condom Factory and Planned Parenthood. In the name of Dan Savage and Greta Christina, we pray, for they are the true gods and goddesses of this world. Do I hear a ramen? Amen. All right. Bless you. All right. So, now that we've been properly blessed, I'm going to give you a quick overview of what we're going to look at today. We're going to talk about, I want to talk about sexual shame. You may wonder, well, that's not the title, but yeah, it is. I'll pull it all together. I want to show, especially today, the power of male shame. It's a concept nobody's talking about. It's something I've never heard any other psychologist talk about. And I hope that when you walk out of here, whether you're male or female, you'll realize that there's a psychological phenomenon happening within our community, within our culture, that deals directly with how men feel about their sexuality. I want to explore ideals of shame and guilt and how they impact our behavior. And I want to give you some tools before you walk out of here. I want you to have some conceptual tools to look at yourself and look how you have been programmed probably by our religious society. So to begin with, we need to understand what the psychological power of especially Christianity is, although this could be said of many others, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam. And that is what I call, in my book, I call it the toxic trio. There's three things you have to believe in order to create a toxic religion. The first one is that you have to believe in an afterlife. Now, you could believe in an afterlife where they have orgies every day, and it's okay to have orgies every day here. That's no big deal. So belief in an afterlife in itself is not necessary and insufficient for making a toxic religion. The next thing you have to believe, though, is that there's a voyeuristic God who's watching you all the time. Now, he may love watching you have sex, in which case, if he's Jesus, you're having a threesome with Jesus every time. If it could be that they just like to watch you masturbate. Is Jesus getting off while he's watching you? I don't know. So there's nothing particularly toxic about that. The Greek gods watch people have sex all the time. The Greek gods themselves had sex. Nobody seemed to have too much problem with that. But the third belief, added to the first two, creates a toxicity. And that is a belief that a God dictates a specific kind of sexual behavior to the exclusion of all others as a condition of entry into some afterlife. You put that into the equation, and now you have a toxic religion. Whether that religion be Islam or Mormonism, all the major patriarchal religions have this kind of belief structure. And it's the three that come together to create problems within our own programming. And it creates a perfect storm because what it does is it creates a death neurosis. It makes us afraid of sex because sex leads to death. You go to hell for having the wrong kind of sex. That ties together very early, oftentimes in our childhood. You find out if you touch yourself down here, you're going to go to hell. Well, deaths and sex and religion all come together very rapidly in our early childhood training. It also requires an apocalyptic, oftentimes is facilitated with an apocalyptic view. And that's why Christianity became what it was. Paul said you shouldn't be having sex, and if you do, it's because you're too weak, and you should stay single, and Jesus is coming any day, so don't have sex and don't masturbate, and all that sort of stuff. So from the very beginning, Christianity felt like Jesus is coming back, so what's the use of sex? And that played out. I don't have time to explain that today, but that played out in the whole creation of the way Christianity became what I call an asexual religion. Because basically, sex is a sin, and you're going to die if you do it. Under very limited conditions, if you're married, you can do it. But every other condition, you can't. So it creates what I call a death neurosis, which then leads to anxiety about my own mortality and ties my mortality to my sexuality. And it creates an elevated fear of punishment. And it results in anxieties that you're not even aware of, starting when you're very young. A fear of hell, a fear of damnation. But most of all, a fear of social ostracization. Because if you don't behave a certain way, the community will throw you out. If you get caught having sex in a certain way or doing something wrong, you will get ostracized. So we can tie all this together in a 5 or 6 or 7-year-old child, and it can create terror in these children when they start experiencing adolescence. And it creates an approach avoidance. I mean, imagine a 12 or 13-year-old boy or girl who's feeling lots of sexual feelings and they want to do something about it. They want to masturbate, but if I do it, I'm going to hell. So I do it, now I'm going to go to hell. I got to go confess. And if I confess, the minister's going to get mad at me or the priest. So it's got all these crazy mixed up emotions. And you know, sex is just normal. But religion sure doesn't teach that to us. Sex creates incredible tumult and stormy feelings inside of ourselves. And it's all to the advantage of religion. So, sex is deadly. Don't do it unless you're married. Don't do it if you can possibly avoid it. Jesus even talked about eunuchs. Maybe he was a eunuch. I don't know. Don't do it with improper thoughts. You know, you cannot be screwing your spouse and think about somebody else. You're going to hell for that too, by the way. I've never done that myself. Women are unclean. I mean, in the Jewish religion, women are unclean for almost half of the month. And that's true today of most of the more orthodox Jewish religions. And you're always being watched. Jesus is watching you no matter what you do sexually. So it creates an impossible standard. There's no way for you to live up to this standard. And it's a perfect con game. I call this the guilt cycle. I talk about it in my first book, or my earlier book, The God Virus. It creates a situation where no matter what you do, you're going to feel guilty. And what are you going to have to do about that? You're going to have to go back to get forgiveness. So the guilt cycle is pretty simple. You feel tension, in this case, let's say sexual tension. You engage in the behavior, you masturbate, you have sex with your boyfriend or whatever, then you feel guilty about it. Well, you can only feel guilt if the religion itself taught you what to be guilty of. Because Muslims have a different guilt pattern than Christians do. Catholics have a different guilt pattern than the Presbyterians do. So we see a pattern of sexual guilt that differs by religion. But it all does one thing. It brings you back to the religion you learned it at. Here's the way it works. The guilt cycle we saw earlier, but now you add, oh, but we can forgive you. The priest says, oh, we can forgive you. And the minister says, we can forgive you. So you go back, you get religious forgiveness. You read your Bible, you go to confession, you do whatever you have to do to get rid of the guilt. And then you feel great relief. Jesus has forgiven me. Wow, praise the Lord. And then next week you masturbate again. You're going, oh boy, you're going to go right back through the cycle again. Every time you go through the guilt cycle, you create more guilt for yourself. Now here's a good analogy. If I came to your house and, you know, maybe for a party, and while I was there, I'd reached in your wallet or your purse and I got $20 out. And then I left, okay? Next week I come back and I say, Karen, I apologize. Can I get forgiveness? I took $20 out of your purse. Would you forgive me? Okay, all right. So next week I go back to their house and I take another $20 out. I come back the next week. Karen, I'm sorry. I took another $20 out. Will you forgive me? How many times are you going to forgive me? You're too easy, Karen. Well, that's kind of the mentality. How many times will Jesus forgive you for masturbating? How many times will Jesus forgive you for having sex with your boyfriend or your girlfriend or thinking wicked thoughts while you're screwing your spouse? Sooner or later, you're going to realize, wow, I'm certainly going to hell for all the accumulated stuff, and I'm not sure Jesus could ever forgive me any more than Karen's going to forgive me. Check your wallet, though. Check your purse. So it creates a perfect guilt cycle, perfect guilt trap. It gives you the disease, then it offers you a cure for the disease. So, as I said earlier, it sets a high standard, but Christianity sets what I call an asexual standard. Asexual meaning no sex at all. I'm not saying anything about you. If you in this room consider yourself an asexual, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the way the religion looks at sexuality, so don't get that confused. Jesus, for example, says you can't get divorced. And if you do, you're going to hell. I would almost submit to you. How many of you know a monogamous person? How many of you know a monogamous person? Okay, keep your hands up. Okay, take monogamous person. Okay, now if it's not you, how would you know? So many people say they're monogamous, but they're really not. 95% of all Americans have premarital sex, and most of the people that have premarital sex is not the person they get married to. And oh, by the way, premarital sex is against the Jesus definition. Jesus' definition, as you've figured out from up here, is you get one sex partner for life. That's monogamy. There's a fish called the anglerfish where the male embeds himself in the body of the female for life. That's monogamy. There's very few species on the planet that truly are monogamous. Yet, Christianity puts us up to this standard of monogamy, whether it's Paul or Jesus or Tertullian, one of the greatest writers of Catholic theology. He is revered throughout the world. There's hardly a pope that doesn't quote him. The most misogynistic asshole ever born. You read this guy, he was actually married. You wonder, how could you be married to this guy? I wouldn't want to be his wife. But he's one of the best Christians on the planet in terms of the Catholic Church, of course. So the best Christian is a non-sexual Christian. How do we know that? The Pope has never had sex. He's the best Christian. Paul says not to have sex if you can possibly avoid it. We've got lots and lots of references to not having sex or sex being wrong or bad or harmful to your spiritual self. And we see virginity. We say Jesus was born of a virgin. That's an asexual concept, if there ever was one. A lot of the saints were asexual. Many had sex, like our friend St. Augustine, who had an orgy every night at his house, praying to God, let me just do it one more time before I become a Christian. His mother was on to him to convert. He finally did convert and then went off to England and did all these things that we now suffer for. Christianity is asexual religion because its ideal is no sex at all. It creates a huge amount of psychological conflicts for followers that can only be resolved through the religion. The beauty of the guilt cycle, especially sexual guilt cycle, is it brings you back to the place you learned that you got the disease in the first place. How many of you have known a Catholic that went and confessed their sins to a Muslim imam? How many of you know a Muslim who goes and confesses their sins to a Presbyterian minister? It doesn't happen like that, does it? You only confess your sins, you only get forgiveness for your sins from the place you learned about the sins in the first place. Baptists go back to Baptist church. They go to Sunday school, they read their Bible, they pray, they confess to each other. Catholics go to confession. So every group has its own way of getting rid of the guilt that was put on them, infected their minds from the very beginning, only at the place they learned it. So the key tools that we see in religious sexuality is guilt and shame. And I want to talk a little bit about guilt and shame so that we discriminate between the two. If you're a psychologist out there, you want to argue with me about this later, fine. But for right now, we're just going to make it simple. Guilt and shame are kind of on a spectrum here, a line, with guilt way over here and shame way over here. Guilt is more an individual concept. You can feel guilty about something and not feel shame. Shame is more a communal concept than guilt. Ted Haggard, our friend out in Colorado Springs who sleeps with gay prostitutes in Denver. You know about him, right? Yeah. Well, Ted Haggard probably felt guilty about having sex with this gay prostitute. But he didn't feel shame until everybody in the planet found out about it, including his congregation. Then he felt overwhelming shame. You have probably experienced this. You've probably been, guilty about or felt bad about something. Let's not call it guilt. And whether you did it or not, if you were accused publicly of it, then you felt a welling up of shame. Because shame has that component of publicity to it. When the world finds out about it, then you feel shame. You can be guilty as hell and not feel any shame. You can also be shameful about something you didn't actually do. Girls, say a girl in Iraq who gets accused of having kissed a boy. She might get her head chopped off. She might get stoned to death. But she will be shamed first, even if she never kissed the boy. She's not guilty of the crime, yet she will still feel shame. Now, the thing about shame is it is communal. The father, the mother, the aunts, the uncles, everybody feels the shame. And it's a disease model. Now that somebody has created a shameful act, that diseases our entire family. So now what do we have to do? We have to get rid of the diseased part of our family. We shun the person. We push them out. We stone them to death. We chop their heads off. Different religions act differently around that. But at minimum, people are shunned for the shamed activity. Mormons shun and throw out their gay boys. That's why you got so many, 40% of all the homeless kids in Salt Lake City are gay boys that have been shunned and thrown out of their homes. Now, we hear a lot about shame with respect to women. We hear about slut shaming and shaming of women about how they dress and how they behave. And that is a religious concept. And I think we buy into this bullshit way too much. When women are shamed, it's really coming from a position of religion telling us what women can and can't do, and the patriarchy supporting that and reinforcing that in our culture. And it's everywhere in our culture. We almost can't get rid of it, can't get away from it. And what it does, it creates a tremendous amount of shame, more in women than in men. Because religions target women. And if you don't believe me, look at how many women are in any church at any given time. 60 to 70% of all the people in a church at any given time are female. Black church, 70 to 80% of the people in black churches are female. Religion targets women. Why? Because they're the ones that raise the kids. They're the ones that are going to infect the next generation. Much more important to infect women with shame and guilt around religion so they can infect the next generation than it is to infect men. So that's why religions put so much emphasis on female sexuality and shaming of women. At least that's the root of it. Now, why am I talking about all this? Because I think within that, we see tremendous amounts of negative, of horrible ideas about femininity and about females, about women, and we see it rising up sometimes, even among us atheists. The notion of woman as tempter, that's throughout Islam, it's throughout Hinduism, you name it, even Buddhism, which everybody gives a pass to. And by the way, Buddhism is just as misogynistic as any other religion, maybe with the exception of California Buddhists. Women as slaves, women as unclean, as I mentioned earlier, for 14 days every month. These are all focused on shame of women's bodies, shame of women's sexuality. They all come from patriarchal religions. I go in quite a bit of detail to show that there are alternative cultures in sex and God. There's alternative cultural ways of looking at female and male sexuality. But we are so inundated with Western sexuality, we don't even realize there are cultures out there that actually women control the sexual nature, sexual relationships. There are cultures out there that do that. They're dying. They're being pushed away by Christianity and Islam, mostly. So what Christianity did, when Judaism came about, it had all these negative things around sexuality and women and all. When Christianity came in, they realized, it's very difficult to convert people who are behaving in a different way sexually. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of give these new converts a pass. Do you realize that a large number of the cultures around Palestine during the first century had polygamous practices? Multiple wives and one man. Now, if I'm Paul and I'm going to go to, some country, some Tarsus or Egypt or somewhere, and I'm going to tell a man, Steve, you got 3 wives. You got to dump 2 of them. I don't think he's going to convert to Christianity under those conditions. But if I say, Steve, you can keep your 3 wives, but from now on, your sons, they can only have 1 wife. Would you agree with that? Oh, yeah, okay, I'll do that. And what happens is Christianity is a very low-class religion. And it's very expensive to have lots of wives. So most Christians were probably monogamous to begin with, just out of from the economy of it. But Christianity really wanted to target the more wealthy people, and those people were polygamous in many cultures. Herod himself had 7 to 9 wives. We know that. Does anybody remember Jesus condemning Herod for having 7 to 9 wives? How about Paul? Did you know anybody condemning anybody for being polygamous in the Bible? I mean, Abraham had lots of wives. David, Solomon, how many concubines and wives do you have? See, nobody even talks about that stuff in the Bible, and yet it's right there in front of their eyes. So Christianity took these ideas of uncleanliness and kind of dumped them in favor of a more guilt-based religion. You can't shame somebody if you don't have a community around you to help shame them. And Christianity is a religion that was individually converting people or converting families maybe. It wasn't like Islam that went out and said the whole village is going to convert to Islam or you'll all die. It's a simple proposition. Christianity never had the power to do that. So it took a little different direction in the early time. But women were a direct threat to early Christianity, and we're still suffering that today. How many of you have read about the Gospel of Mary? Yeah, okay, it's not widely known, is it? Well, of course, it's probably false, but so are the rest of them. And the reason for this is because the New Testament looks at asexuality as the optimum, as the ideal. And so we have to, the early writers of the Gospels and other New Testament, among other early Christian writings, were pretty much asexual. And you know darn good and well there's lots of women running around in the New Testament. In fact, we know a few of them were even married. We knew, say, Peter. I think Peter and Timothy were married. I can't remember which two. We know at least two of the 12 disciples were married. But where are their wives? Where was Jesus' wife? I mean, the Mormons say he had 3 wives. I believe them. I think he was probably more accurate. Joseph Smith probably was more accurate than Paul was. Did you know Jesus had 3 wives? How many of you knew that? None of you knew Jesus had 3 wives? Well, you're buying the Christian bullshit. Mormons are right on this one. I guarantee you. All right? But just think, if Jesus was married, it makes him a sexual creature. Sex, especially sex and female sexuality, are a direct threat to Christian theology. Here's part of the issue. If Jesus had children, then you've got a problem with who succeeds, who takes on the mantle of the religion. And we see Muhammad and Joseph Smith both had problems around that. The children of Muhammad thought they had a special dispensation, and that's where we get the Sunni Islams. And the people who didn't agree with that, or the Shia Islams, the people who didn't agree with that are now called the Sunni Islams. So we have a split just based on who the progeny of the founder of the religion was. Same thing happened with Joseph Smith. 2 major splits. Of course, there's 1,000 more major splits in Mormonism now, but 2 major splits happened directly as a result of does Joseph Smith Jr. get to lead the religion, or does Brigham Young get to lead the religion? That was the split that happened in Mormonism. You didn't see that split in Christianity because Christianity very conveniently got rid of all the women in the New Testament who could be politically powerful. You don't see any women in any politically powerful position in Christianity, the early works. So where are the wives? Where are the sons? Where are the daughters? They don't exist. They're just not there. How is it possible all those grandkids could disappear? How is it possible that there's no children out of 12 guys? I think they were all gay myself, probably. I mean, a guy walking around a desert with 12 guys walking behind him sounds pretty gay to me. So maybe that's what happened. Now let's get on to the basis of the subject we're talking about here, Jesus and masturbation. You have heard it said that you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Notice, ladies, you can look all you want. And there's no prohibition against that for you, but there is for us guys. So Jesus is saying, this is the basis of anti-masturbation literature in the Christians today, is you can't masturbate without thinking, well, I masturbate thinking of the Eiffel Tower myself, but the rest of you guys, I don't know what you're thinking about. You almost can't masturbate without thinking about the opposites. Well, whatever is sexually desirable to you. Could be the opposite sex, could be the same sex. I don't care. So there's little or nothing in the Bible about masturbation except Onan the Barbarian. You probably remember that story. You don't have time to go into it now. But there's no prohibition against women masturbating. There might be a little prohibition against the men, but that's an argument we can have with the experts on biblical theology. But basically, what we know is that Jesus is watching you while you're masturbating from light years away. He can tell if you're getting aroused or you're thinking about somebody else. But my question is, did Jesus himself masturbate? There's 4 different possible answers to this question that we're going to consider here first. And the first is that he never existed, in which case, obvious, he never masturbated. But the second was that he was conceived by parthenogenesis. If you've taken a good biology course, you learned that parthenogenesis is conceiving and having an offspring without fertilizing it with a sperm. Every case of parthenogenesis is female, and it's never happened in the higher mammals at all. It's been artificially induced in rabbits, for example, but it tends to happen in nature more in fish, and in amphibians, in reptiles, but it just doesn't seem to happen in mammals. We don't have that. Parthenogenesis is possible. So if Jesus was born through a parthenogenic process, that means he was a woman. He still could have masturbated, though, if he was a woman. But he was a woman without any Y chromosome in his genetics. He could have been biologically a male, but asexual. He just wasn't interested in sex. In which case, I'm thinking, why the hell is somebody who doesn't care about sex telling me what I can and can't do? That's kind of a problem. If you never experienced it yourself, how can you tell me anything about it? And he was biologically male and sexual, therefore, if he did it perfectly. Right? That's just good theology there, guys. Just good theology. All right, so let's move on a little bit because I want to get down into the depths of the whole shame thing I talked about earlier. And it is all related to how we see our bodies, how we're taught about our bodies, how we're taught about sexuality. And it leads to devastating consequences within our culture. And I think ultimately is responsible for a huge amount of the violence we see, domestic violence, shaming of women, and other things that we see in our culture. And I call it just men's shame. It's a pretty simple idea. Men are shamed for not controlling their women. When I was raised, there's places in the Bible, a woman should keep her mouth shut. If she wants to know anything, she'd ask her husband. Paul talks about that. Whether that's forged or not is irrelevant. It's in the Bible. There are people who actually believe that crap. So men are shamed for not. How many of you at one point in time were told you need to control your daughters, you need to control your wife? Anybody? Oh, you weren't raised around Wichita, Kansas, were you? I was from Wichita, Kansas. I'm sure it's the same in Little Rock, or at least it was when I was younger. Men are shamed for not showing dominance over women. In a patriarchal culture, men should be always seen as somewhat above women. That's just the way Christianity works. It's the way Islam works. Men are shamed for behavior that looks submissive with respect to women. You're a pussy if you can't stand up to your own wife. I've heard that many times. Men are shamed for sexual activities that are not procreative. You masturbate, you must be a homo. When I was a kid in junior high, in the locker room, boys were always looking around saying, you shake it more than 3 times, you're playing with it. You must be a homo. I mean, that was literally what how many of you guys heard that? Yeah, oh, look at it. Yeah, almost every guy raised his hand in here. Right. That is a form of male shaming. It's saying you are less than us, as you are not a man. You're not a full man if you masturbate. You're not a full man if you're gay. You're not a full man if you don't dominate women, if you don't treat women in a certain way, if you don't joke about women, if you don't have misogynistic ideas and thoughts that you express to the rest of the group. All those things bring shame upon the man. And I think this is really important. It's a key to why men behave the way they are in our culture oftentimes. So women are encouraged at the same time to engage in threats. Men are encouraged to engage in threats and violence against women in some cultures. And whether, we're seeing it in the news media, the way kids are acting in high school. I mean, that girl that is practically in hiding now because she was falsely accused of being a rape victim. So what would have happened to her if she was really the rape victim on top of all that? And this is an entire community acting on male shame. You can bet Well, it's not just the men that are engaging in it, but you can bet it's a lot to do with this. Men learn to respond with violence to women who stand up to them. Men respond with violence to women who challenge them publicly. I can clearly remember watching a relative of mine slap his wife because she dared to question him in public in church. And he slapped her in public. Nobody questioned him. Nobody said a word. My uncle said she deserved it. Wait a minute. All she did was challenge something he said. It wasn't even life-threatening. It wasn't anything terrible as far as I could tell from a 12-year-old boy's perspective. So male identity is very closely related to superiority over women. That's the fundamental lesson of Christianity and of patriarchal religions in general. And here's a great example of it. Men trying to murder a 12, 14-year-old girl in Pakistan because she had the temerity to say girls should be educated. I've just been reading David Fitzgerald's book, his newest book on Mormonism. Great read, really enjoying it a lot. But what most is interesting is how the fundamentalist Mormons treat girls in the fundamentalist communities in Utah and Arizona. It doesn't look a lot different than what we see here. They let girls go to school until they're 14 because the state makes them. But as soon as that girl turns 14, they're out of school. And keeping girls uneducated is really a key part of that religious, just like it is in all fundamentalist religions. So, in very religious cultures, you'll see lots of male violence against women. One of the best predictors of child abuse and abuse within a family, the second best predictor is religiosity. The first best predictor is drug abuse or alcohol abuse. But second best, even if there's not that in there, religiosity is a very good indicator of violence against especially women in a family. Women are subject to threats. They're subject to violence if they're not submissive to the man in almost any religion. And men blame the women for the violence when it's done to them. Remember what I said earlier? He said she deserved it. That's the mentality of male violence. And if this relative of mine had not slapped her in public, in church, he probably would have been shamed by the rest of the group. You let your wife say that to you in church? That's unforgivable. You are now shamed by the community. So, let's move over to the female side, because women imbibe this shame. Women learn this shame, and it goes deep into their own psyche as well. Women internalize the shame, and then they pass the shame on to their daughters. Well, she deserved it. I've actually heard Christian women say, my daughter got beaten, but she deserved it because she questioned her father or something like that. So we see that in women propagating it to their own daughters. You don't even need a man around to propagate sexual male shame. You just need a woman who will teach her daughters those very things. Ladies, have any of you been taught that kind of stuff by your... Okay, I see several. Read Candace Gorham's new book, The Ebony Exodus Project. It is filled. How many of you have seen it or heard of it yet? The Ebony Exodus Project. Okay. She's got tons of stories in her book. It's focused on black women and black religion, but I think we could all identify with it, showing how religion shames black women, especially black religion shames black women. And that gets propagated into the children, generation after generation. Female children are among the greatest threats to male dignity within a patriarchal system. If a female child challenges a male, they have ways of putting that down. And we see this in fundamentalist religions. We see how the Mormons treat girls when they challenge. Girls are just, especially the fundamentalist Mormons, the girls themselves can be beaten for having challenged anybody about anything. I mean, you're constantly under physical violent threat in many religious households. And these religious households may look just as normal as anybody else. I have a neighbor, lives right behind me. He's got 2 beautiful daughters, beautiful wife. If I go out to mow my lawn, they have to get inside. They cannot be outside if I'm outside. Now, I don't know this for a fact. I don't know that he told them that. I just know that every time I go outside, they run as fast as they can to get inside. And I find out later they belong to some cult, some really crazy cult, and women are not supposed to socialize with men within this cult. This is in Kansas City. It's about as white a neighborhood, bland a neighborhood as you could ever be in, and yet this exists right next door to me. I can't prove he's abused those girls, but the way they behave anywhere close to me, I can tell they're scared to death of me. Why would they be? I've never said a word to them, but they are scared to death of me. So what we find is that mothers are very important vectors, or key vectors, to this shaming process. And it creates internal shame for them, and then they propagate the shame. And in any situation, it must be the girl's fault. It increases anxiety, intensifies all sorts of things, including stress hormones. And so we see lots of stress among religious families because the threat of violence or the threat of shame or the threat of ostracism is always there. And we know that hormones can really create all sorts of problems within people's ability to properly develop through normal developmental cycles, both males and females. So it becomes the norm that you can't even relax in a religious home. You've got to constantly be vigilant, especially women, especially girls. You've got to be vigilant because at any time you could be slapped, you could be told you're wrong, you could have the disapproval of the dominant man in the group, and that dominant man may just be an older brother. And in Islam, you got to be, if you're 12, you have to have a man, a 12-year-old boy can accompany a woman. A full-grown woman has to have a 12-year-old boy accompany her. So in that case, the boy is now the dominant. There's lots of anxiety that comes up in these kinds of families. Now, how does this all tie into male shame? Well, if a male doesn't discipline his daughter, he receives shame for that within the community. Males are taught shame by other males, and if I don't respond to the male shame messages from my peers and cohorts, then I myself am shamed. How many of you are in the Boy Scouts? Did you get any sexual shame in the Boy Scouts? I got tons of it when I was in the Boy Scouts. Lots of homophobia in the Boy Scouts when I was growing up. Am I correct? You've seen it? Okay, a lot of you have seen that. Well, that's a form of male shame. Why are we saying you're a homo if it's not to say you're less than a man? That's the message here, and it's a part of the male shame that I'm talking about. So all these teach male shame around sex, around masturbation, but I'm getting ready to show you a bunch of pictures. Guess which ones don't masturbate? This guy doesn't masturbate. This guy never masturbates. He's dead now, of course. This guy, we know he only looks in the mirror and masturbates. I've got a quote from him on that one, but no, he says he never masturbates. He condemns people for masturbating. Joyce Meyer never masturbated. Billy Graham, do you think him or his son ever masturbated? This guy never masturbated. Oh, wait, no, he probably did because he was in the... So you're probably thinking, oh, Darrel, this is great historical information, psychology, but how does it apply to me? Here's how it applies to me. For 2,000 years, preachers have been saying that normal human sexuality is perverting us. Jerry Falwell stands up and says those sodomites are perverting our culture, and Pat Robertson says they're bringing hurricanes into New Orleans and stupid stuff like that. And they have persecuted people. Probably as many as 250,000 women died in the late Middle Ages around witch hunts. 250,000 women were burned at the stake or hanged or otherwise tortured just because they were expressing normal human sexuality. For 2,000 years, religion, especially Christianity and Islam, have totally distorted human sexuality. I think it's time for us to take our sexuality back. It no longer should be in the hands of Christians or any other patriarchal religion, Mormons or whatever. So let's proclaim our own sexual freedom, if you will, and let's not let them set the agenda. But unfortunately, we're in a polluted culture. It's like a fish swimming in the water. If it's polluted, the fish is getting polluted too. You're swimming in this culture, you're getting polluted by sexual ideas that clearly are religious. They're not atheists. And I've met many atheists who still carry around crazy ideas about their own bodies, about their sexuality. So what I'm going to do is look at a simple concept. If you feel shame or guilt around your sexuality, you're probably still infected with religious ideas. You may be an atheist. You may even be a lifelong atheist. But if you feel shame or guilt around normal sexual activities, that's religion speaking. You are infected with the God virus in some way, shape, or form. We act like Christians, and we're atheists. That's crazy. Why do I need to act like a Christian? We act like Christians when we hide our sexuality, when we pretend like we don't do things, when we let religionists condemn other people and we never challenge them. If I see somebody behaving in a racist or a sexist way, I will challenge them. I will come right in there and say, that's wrong, and I'll challenge that. I don't hear us doing that around sexual stuff oftentimes because we're still buying into the Christian sexual craziness that we learned within our culture. When we act ashamed of others, when we don't stand up for other people, we act like Christians when we act like we don't use pornography. I once talked to a porn shop owner. And it was a woman who owned this big giant porn shop on I-70 halfway between St. Louis and Kansas City. She was delighted when they put this up. I wonder why. Now she's got a little tiny sign and lots of good advertising there. I've never seen the parking lot without something in it. You know, I visited her many times and
Huh? It's in New Mexico. I have that photo.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I got this. Yeah, but they're all up and down the South and the Midwest for sure. So, you know, Jeff Foxworthy, he talks about you might be a redneck. Well, I'm going to talk about you might be a Christian atheist. Instead of you're a redneck, you might be a Christian atheist if you feel guilty about masturbating. If right now you feel guilty that you masturbate. Now, not everybody does. I'm not saying everybody does. Everybody probably has at some point in their life. But if you feel guilty about it, that's a religious notion. You're acting like a Christian. You might be a Christian atheist if you feel ashamed that you enjoy porn. You might be a Christian atheist if you have difficulty talking to your children about sex and sexuality. I've had atheists say, I can't talk to my children about sex. Well, what's the root of that? Well, I was raised in a home. My dad would never talk to me. My mom gave me 3 words, don't touch yourself or something like that. That was the extent of my sex education. I feel guilty about sex. Well, what is you're infected with Christian ideas about sex? Let's get rid of that crap. We don't need it. You might be a Christian atheist if you have difficulty talking to your spouse or your partner about sexual fantasies you'd like to try. Now, I'm not saying that your partner has to engage in those sexual fantasies with you. There's a clear line here. Consent is what is most important. But if you can't even talk to your spouse, the most intimate, important person in your life, about your sexual ideas, something is seriously wrong there. And it's probably because of that scripture I showed a little bit earlier when Jesus said you can't even think of somebody else. I had a woman come to counseling with me. She was all distraught. She was ready to get divorced from her husband because he admitted to thinking about other women while they were having sex. Wow. Every man I know would probably get divorced if that was the criteria for divorce. And many, many of the women, okay? Here, let's own up here. Anybody want to own up to thinking about other people while you're in bed with one person? Anybody want to own up to that? Yeah, a lot of liars in this group. You might be a Christian redneck, a Christian atheist, if you have difficulty talking feel disgust around normal sexual activities. You might be a Christian atheist if you shame others, especially women, around sexual and sexuality issues. So, here's my thesis. The thesis of the whole book of Sex and God is that sex is the weak spot of religion. It's the one place we can attack religion and it will collapse. I think 2 things you can do in raising children or grandchildren. You can expose them to lots of religions so that when they grow up they'll realize they're all bullshit. And you can expose them to positive sexuality. Because every religion, every patriarchal religion on this planet is dependent upon sex-negative views. Without sex-negative approaches, Christianity would fall. Can you imagine the Pope waking up one day and saying, wow, I had a great wet dream last night. I think we'll make masturbation legal. Or Ted Haggard saying, I loved having sex with that gay prostitute. I think we'll make homosexuality legal. No, you're probably not going to see that. Sex positivity can't possibly build churches. And that's why you see the most sex-positive religions, they aren't growing. I mean, how many Unitarians are there? And they're very sex-positive. You just don't see that because sex negativity is what creates the guilt cycle. The guilt cycle brings you back to church and so forth that I talked about earlier. So be out about your sexuality and respect other people in their sexuality. And here's some examples. You could say, and this is pretty simple to do, sure, I fornicate just like most religious people do. Sure, I masturbate. Don't you? Well, you're missing out on something here, aren't you? Let's normalize normal human sexuality. And I use that word normal very loosely. I'm not saying there is a normal, but it's pretty damn normal to masturbate. So if you can't even talk out loud, say, yeah, I masturbate, don't you? You're simply implying that maybe you might want to consider enjoying yourself some more. Sure, I use pornography like most religious people do. Did you happen to know the 2 highest porn states in the nation? Utah and Mississippi. No, even Arkansas isn't that low, yeah. The most religious states use the highest levels of pornography. And we see this throughout the world. I could tell you tons of stories about, well, I won't, but tons of stories of religion and pornography coming really, if it weren't for strong religious beliefs, pornography industry might collapse in many states. I had premarital sex, didn't you? 95% of the people did. The only people that didn't have premarital sex on this planet are Catholic priests and nuns and Baptist ministers. And I'll sell you a bridge if you believe that. My sister had an abortion, and I supported her. Supported whatever decision she made. It is not a shame to have an abortion. Or I could say, I had an abortion. Well, not me personally, but and it was a good decision for me at that time. That religion has tried to teach us shame around abortion. I want to challenge that. An abortion is not a shameful thing. It's a choice you make based upon the best conditions of your life at that particular time and the choices you want to make, not what some religious does. If you cringe within yourself at the notion of somebody else having an abortion, that's your problem, not theirs. If you think abortion is a sinful, guilt-inducing thing, you've learned that probably from religion. You didn't learn that from the secular community. You can frame behavior. Let's frame other people's behavior. Control of women's bodies is the #1 priority of all patriarchal religions. Without controlling women, we don't have a religion because you can't propagate it to the next generation without the full participation of women. So we need to change it and challenge it. Here's one way to do that. We can say things like, I use birth control because I like sex in or outside of marriage, just like Newt Gingrich and Rush Limbaugh do. Turn the tables on them. Let them know these 2 guys are not exactly your greatest models, and yet you're the ones listening to them, and they're condemning us. This guy had hundreds of lovers, according to his own congressional staff. These are his supposed allies. They'd have to go knock on his window to get him out of his car to go make a political speech when he was still running in Congress. So what kind of a model is this? I'm going to just turn the tables on him, reframe the behavior. I could ask questions like, does your minister or priest masturbate, do you think? They tell you not to masturbate. I wonder if they do. I'm not asking for an answer. I'm just asking a question. Do you think they use porn? Does your minister lust in his heart? If he does, is he going to hell or you? Who's going to hell here? Has your priest ever had an affair, I wonder? Did your bishop have premarital sex? These are simple questions. I'm not even worried about getting an answer. I'm just worried about putting questions in people's minds that will slowly but surely undermine their view of sexuality, their sexuality and their religion's sexuality. So I am not a Christian, and I don't need to act like a Christian. And when we do act like Christians, we actually do kind of what like Dave Silverman said this morning in his talk. We validate what they are. I don't want to validate Christian sexuality. I want to validate secular sexuality. I don't have the right music on for that. So I am a secular sexual, and I don't want anybody else telling me what I can and cannot do. So I want to leave you with this last challenge here. How can you go out and be a full atheist like Dave Silverman talked about today? And how can you go out and be a full human being, sexually positive human being, challenging and showing other people who you are? I'm not trying to get you fired. I don't think you need to go out and expose yourself or anything. But you can subtly but carefully let people know, I don't buy into Christian sexual ideas. I don't think talking about masturbation is bad or wrong. I don't think having premarital sex or even sex in some other situation, like if you're an open or if you're polyamorous or you like swinging, I don't see a big problem with telling people what you are or how the choices you've made in your own sexuality. We are free people. We have a sexuality that we are in control of. Jesus is not in control of my body. The Pope is not in control of my body. I'm in control of my body. If I do it with respect to the other person, with consent and with safety, that's my business. It's not anyone else's business on this planet. And we should be out and open about that. Let's not let the Christians set the agenda. Thanks for your attention today.